Good evening. Let the world grow quiet now. This first story takes us to a snow-covered village, where a child follows the quiet footsteps of a fox, each trail a secret, each step a soft remembering. There was a village where the winters came gently, like an old friend placing a warm hand on the windowsill. Snow did not fall with fury there, it drifted, soft and slow, settling on rooftops and branches as if it had been invited. This village had no name on maps. It wasn't the sort of place travelers looked for. The wind knew it, and so did the owls, but most folk stumbled upon it only when they were tired of looking for something else. One winter, as the days grew quieter and the sky wore its pale silver shawl, the villagers began to notice something odd. Each morning, when the sun barely peered over the hills and the frost still whispered on the glass, they would find strange markings in the snow. Not boot prints. Not bird tracks. But long, elegant trails that curved and looped, shaped like curls of smoke or threads of silk. They swept across the fields, twirled around the river stones, and danced beneath the frost-bitten trees. It was a fox, this much they could tell. The paw prints were sure and light. But this fox walked not in straight lines, not in search of food or shelter. Its steps followed patterns, like a story being written across the snow with a careful paw. And by morning, the maps had vanished. For as the sun rose, just enough to stir the icicles and warm the edges of rooftops, the snow would sigh, and fall anew. In a cottage with a chimney that hummed when it rained, there lived a child named Luma. She had hair like tangled starlight and eyes the color of pond ice, still, round, and full of wondering. Luma wasn't like the other children. She didn't run fast or shout loud. She spent her days quietly collecting things the wind forgot, feathers stuck in fence posts, buttons hidden in the earth, tiny bones left behind by curious crows. She kept them in glass jars lined along her window, where they caught the soft morning light. When she first saw the fox's trail, Luma stopped still in her boots. She'd been walking alone beneath the gray-stitched sky, a basket over her arm and a scarf wrapped twice around her chin. And there, winding before her across the meadow like a ribbon drawn by a dreaming hand, were the tracks, graceful and strange, curling into spirals and dots, then looping away like music. But Luma didn't follow them right away. Instead, she knelt and pressed her gloved fingers into one of the curves. The snow was soft, undisturbed by wind, and cold like the inside of a lullaby. That night, as the fire purred in the hearth, Luma took out a piece of parchment and began to draw, not the shape of the tracks, but how they made her feel. The gentle swoop of a beginning. The curious pause of a question. A turn that felt like remembering something once lost. And in her dreams, the fox appeared, not close, not clearly, but there, just at the edge of the snow light. Watching. Each morning, Luma returned to the fields before the frost had fully melted. And each morning, she found a new trail. One curved around the old well and formed a perfect spiral before disappearing behind the willow trees. Another traced a delicate arc along the frozen brook, each pawprint set with the precision of a painter's brush. Sometimes, the fox's print circled nothing at all, just an open patch of snow where no tree or stone stood. And yet, it always felt like something had been there. Luma began to mark them in her notebook, not as exact maps, but as feelings, tiny sketches, curled lines, bursts of ink that reminded her of music she had never heard. One evening, she lit her paper lantern early and hung it outside her window. It swayed gently in the still air, casting a golden circle onto the snow. That night, the fox came closer. Its prints passed directly beneath the lantern's light, then paused. In the morning, where the trail had stopped, Luma found something new, a single, perfect stone, smooth as river glass and shaped like a teardrop. It was warm in her hand, and it pulsed faintly, as if it remembered something, just barely. She did not tell anyone. Not yet. Some things needed to be quiet for a while, like a secret sleeping beneath the snow. The days passed in their quiet way. The sun stayed low and pale, and the air was filled with the sound of nothing, no birdsong, no wind, just the slow sigh of winter. The villagers began to notice that Luma was often staring at the snow. She watched it the way others watched fire or rain, as if it were speaking in a tongue only she could hear. And perhaps it was. Each trail the fox left was more intricate than the last. One morning, the prince formed a perfect circle with a smaller spiral inside. Another day, they followed the shape of a tree, except there was no tree where they walked, only the pattern of one drawn in frost. Luma sat in her room late at night, copying the shapes again and again, until they began to form a strange, silent language. She didn't understand it, not quite, but her fingers seemed to know what to draw before her mind did. It wasn't long before she dreamed of the fox again. This time, it was standing still at the center of one of its snow maps. Its fur shimmered like candlelight, and in its eyes was a kindness so deep, it made her chest ache. When she woke, she found that the snow outside her window hadn't fallen overnight. The prints were still there. Waiting. The smooth, teardrop-shaped stone Luma had found remained warm, even when left upon the windowsill. It did not grow hot, nor did it flicker or hum, but it held a quiet warmth, like the memory of a hand once held. When Luma pressed it to her cheek, she felt not heat, but a kind of comfort, as though someone far away was thinking gently of her. One morning, while the frost was still blue on the panes, she took the stone to the edge of the meadow. The fox's new trail was unlike any she had seen before, broad arcs, then narrow zigzags, a shape like a key, or perhaps a lock. Luma stepped carefully beside the prince, not to disturb them, and reached the center of the pattern. There, nestled in the snow, was another stone, this one a pale, icy gray, cool to the touch, shaped like a small leaf. She placed it beside the first. Nothing happened, not at first. But as the clouds above drifted apart and a shaft of soft winter sunlight reached the snow, both stones began to glow faintly, only for a moment. And Luma understood, in a way beyond words, that the stones were listening. Listening to the snow. Listening to her. That night, the wind shifted. It wasn't fierce, just different, carrying with it the scent of pine and something older, like distant bells or forgotten lullabies. Luma felt it in her dreams, in the flickering space between sleep and waking. The next morning, the snow had not fallen at all. The fox's prints remained, bold and sharp, as if they had just been placed. Luma followed them further than she had before. Past the edge of the meadow, through the birch grove that creaked quietly in the cold, until she reached a fir tree unlike the rest. It was tall and quiet, its needles glinting with frost, and beneath it, the fox. It was not afraid of her. It stood still, its fur a soft copper gold dusted with snow, its eyes like pools of warm honey in the winter light. It looked at her not with wildness, but with knowing. And then, slowly, it stepped aside. Beneath the fir tree, carved into the snow like an engraving, was a perfect circle surrounded by delicate curves, shapes that echoed all the maps Luma had seen, but more complete, more whole. She knew, without being told, that this was not a map of a place. It was a map of a feeling. A way through something invisible. A path drawn for the heart. Luma did not speak of the fox to anyone. Not because she feared disbelief, but because the quiet between them was too delicate to name aloud. Like mist resting on water, one breath could scatter it. So she carried the memory like a candle cupped in her hands, protected from the wind. Each day, the fox returned. Its trails became more intricate, more deliberate. Sometimes they led to places that felt oddly familiar, an old garden gate no longer used, a hollow in the hedge where Luma had once hidden as a child. Other times, they formed shapes that stirred her chest, a curl like her mother's handwriting, a swirl that reminded her of a lullaby her father used to hum before the world grew quieter. And in the center of each map, the fox would leave a stone. Not ordinary stones, but ones that felt. Some pulsed with stillness. Others shimmered faintly with longing. One, small and dark and smooth, carried the faintest ache, like a farewell never spoken. Luma began to place them in a circle on her windowsill. A quiet compass of feelings. They didn't point to north or south, but to things once forgotten, things she hadn't realized still lived inside her. And always, the fox watched from a distance. Not asking to be followed. Simply drawing, and waiting. One morning, just before the sky turned pink with early light, Luma woke with a thought so strong it felt like a whisper pressed to her ear. Bring them. She rose, pulled on her warmest coat, and carefully gathered the stones in a small velvet pouch. The sky was pale and breathless. The snow was untouched, except for the trail. This time, the fox's path wound not toward the woods, nor the fields, but up into the hills beyond the village, where the land rose like a quiet shoulder beneath the sky. Luma followed, breath slow and feet sure, the crunch of her steps wrapped in silence. The trail stopped in a clearing, a circle of snow surrounded by sleeping trees, their branches heavy with frost. The fox sat at the center, tail curled around its paws. As Luma stepped into the clearing, the fox stood and turned to face her. Gently, with hands that trembled just a little, Luma poured the stones from her pouch into the snow. One by one, they tumbled into place. The moment the last one settled, the air changed. Not loud. Not bright. But like a sigh, released after being held for too long. The stones glowed faintly, then dimmed. And where they had landed, tiny flowers bloomed through the snow, delicate and glowing, petals like lace made of moonlight. The fox looked at Luma, and for the first time, took a step forward. Its nose brushed her mitten. Then it turned, and vanished into the trees, its work complete. Days passed. No new tracks. No new stones. The fox was gone. But something lingered in the village, something soft and unseen. The snow seemed gentler. The wind spoke in a hush. And in the corners of the meadow where the fox's prints had once danced, small things began to stir beneath the snow. Luma wandered the paths she had memorized, no longer looking for the fox, but feeling the echoes of what had been. Beneath a pine branch, she found a patch of moss still green. Near the stream, a single violet poked its head through the frost. And one morning, in the clearing where the flowers had bloomed from stone, she found a garden. It was small, hidden. But there it was, quiet shoots curling up from the earth, as though spring had slipped its hand through winter's sleeve and left behind a secret. Luma knelt beside it and smiled. The snow remembered. That same week, an old traveler came through the village, his coat patched with bits of sky-blue thread, his boots worn and kind. He called himself a cartographer, though his maps were unlike any Luma had ever seen. They weren't maps of towns or rivers. They showed colors and lines, shapes that shimmered as he turned the parchment. "I map places of feeling," he told the baker, who wasn't sure how to price a loaf in exchange for a dream. Luma brought him tea, curious. He studied her for a moment and said, "You've seen one, haven't you? A snow fox." Her breath caught. He smiled. They appear when someone forgets how to listen to what they carry. They draw maps not to lead others, but to remind you of what you already know. She said nothing. But she did bring out her notebook, filled with swirling sketches and soft spirals. He studied them long, then nodded. "You've made a very good map," he whispered. Spring crept in slowly that year. Not all at once, but like a guest removing its shoes at the door. The snow softened, and the wind began to smell of damp roots and melted bark. Luma no longer looked for the fox, but still, some mornings, she thought she heard paws in the distance. Not near. Just beyond. Like a dream one can't quite return to, but still carries in the chest. She began walking paths that didn't yet exist, paths she made herself, through hills and over stones, following no trail but what she felt. She kept drawing, not maps of places, but of feelings, hope in the shape of a circle, stillness like a spiral, longing like a path that loops back upon itself. One morning, she left a stone of her own on a tree stump. It was warm when she placed it. And when she returned, it was gone. Years passed, but the story remained. Children whispered of a fox that drew shapes in the snow. Elders spoke of a winter when flowers bloomed through frost. And Luma, now grown, though never hurried, still walked the fields. She no longer searched. She listened. One winter evening, while snow fell like the hush of stars, she paused on the edge of the meadow. The world was silent, blanketed in soft white. And there, just one, was a single fox print. Small. fresh. No trail followed it. Just one step. But that was enough. She smiled, and for the first time in many winters, she hummed. A song made of snowlight. A song made of maps. A song made of remembering. And the snow, ever so quietly, listened back. Now we drift into a dream. To a hidden market that appears only in sleep, where time slows, memories glow, and the heart finds what it didn't know it had lost. In the silken hush of an ancient sky, where the stars once hummed like lullabies drifting across the cradle of night, there shimmered a very small star. It was not grand like the lords of the constellations, nor proud like the comets who swept the heavens with fire-tipped tails. No, this star was quiet and gentle, more a whisper than a blaze. It blinked softly between the curls of cloud, singing songs not with sound, but with feeling, touching the dreams of those who unknowingly wandered beneath it. Every evening, as dusk melted into midnight, the little star would send out its song. It was a simple melody, no more than a few notes, but the way it swayed across the wind made hearts soften and breaths slow. Owls would tilt their heads just so to hear it. Foxes curled deeper into their dens. Trees, though rooted and ancient, leaned ever so slightly skyward. Even the moon, grand and knowing, would dim its glow just a little to let the stars' lullaby shine. But the star carried something more precious than its light or its song. It had a name. A name that pulsed through it like a heartbeat. It was not spoken aloud, no star's name is, but it existed deep within, nestled in the folds of its glow. It was the name the wind used when it swept across the sky to greet it, the name the night whispered back to when all else fell still. One night, just as twilight gave way to the fuller dark, a strange stillness crept across the sky. The great bare constellation paused mid-step. The planets blinked slower. And the little star forgot. Its name, once so certain, had slipped like mist through its fingers, if stars could be said to have fingers at all. Its light flickered once. Then again. It tried to sing, but the notes came out like ash. There was no melody without the name, for the name was its shape, its color, its soul. Dimmer now, the star began to drift. Not downward, as fallen stars do, trailing sparks in grand farewells, but sideways, softly, as though the sky itself had loosened its grip. It did not fall. It simply floated, slowly and aimlessly, further and further from the familiar folds of the night. And no one, not even the wise moon, knew why. Beneath that silent drift of stars, where clouds wandered like sleepy herds across the indigo fields of night, there was a hill. A quiet hill, rounded and mossy, where the grasses whispered even when the wind was still. The folk of the village below called it Willow's Knoll, though no one quite remembered who Willow was. At its top grew a single, old willow tree, crooked with age, its branches like arms folding the sky. Beneath it lived a boy named Miro. Miro was not like the other children of the village. While others ran and tumbled in the fields or sat in crowded rooms where laughter echoed like songbirds, Miro wandered alone, always with his lantern. It was no ordinary lantern, but an heirloom of uncertain age, shaped like a silver bell and hung from a curling iron handle. The flame inside never flickered too bright, nor too dim, and even in the fiercest wind, it held steady, a soft, pearly light that made shadows seem to hum instead of creep. Most believed it was simply enchanted, passed from grandmother to grandson as a token of old tales. But Miro knew it was more than that. The lantern did not shine to light his way. It shone to hear. It pulsed gently when stories brushed the air, when secrets passed like breezes over stone, or when dreams echoed faintly from the sky. Each night, when the world quieted and even the crickets grew weary of singing, Miro would climb to the top of the hill with the lantern swinging from his hand. He'd settle beside the willow, knees pulled to his chest, eyes gazing into the canopy of stars. And there, in the listening stillness, he would wait. He had heard the stars before, not with his ears, but with the hush behind his heartbeat. He had heard their lullabies, their turning songs, their sleepy harmonies. But tonight, something was missing. A hush too deep. A space where sound should be. His lantern dimmed, then flared softly, like it, too, had noticed the silence. And then he saw it. A small star, pale and trembling, hovered near the edge of the sky. It looked uncertain. Not falling, not flying. Just floating. Lost. Its glow was faint, not with age, but with absence, like something essential had been left behind. Miro rose slowly, brushing the sleep from his shoulders. The willow's branches swayed gently above him. He looked once more at the flickering light within his lantern. It was listening. Waiting. Without a word, he stepped from the hill's crown, barefoot on the cool grass, and began to follow the silence. For in the heart of the hush, he felt the gentle pull of something lonely, something sacred, something that had forgotten its name. The journey did not begin with fanfare, nor with any certain path beneath Miro's feet. The grass bent easily as he passed, the night tenderly parting to let him through, as if it, too, sensed that something sacred had gone missing from the sky. He walked with quiet steps, his lantern swinging gently, casting rounded pools of pearlescent light across the earth. The world was not asleep, exactly, but listening. Trees leaned their boughs toward him. The wind rustled in odd, thoughtful murmurs. Even the frogs in the nearby stream croaked less, their rhythm slowing into a gentle cadence. All things seemed to sense the quiet melody that should have been there, a starlit hum that now floated somewhere beyond reach. Miro did not ask where he was going. The lantern would show him, not by shining forward, but by gently tugging at his heart. It pulsed when he stepped in the right direction, and dimmed when he turned away. He followed not a road, but a feeling, as though trailing the invisible ribbon of a forgotten lullaby. He passed beneath arching branches where fireflies blinked like sleepy thoughts. He crossed a low bridge of stone, worn smooth by centuries of quiet crossings. The stream beneath it babbled in a language only the lantern seemed to understand, for it flickered 3 times, slowly, before Miro pressed onward. As he walked deeper into the night, the silence began to change. It was no longer simply an absence of sound, it had become a presence of its own. Not heavy. Not frightening. But deep, like the quiet inside a bell after it has rung, or the space between a question and its answer. And within that silence, a single thread shimmered, a thread made not of light, but of memory, faint and gold like the line of a dream just before waking. Miro felt it. Not with his fingers, but with his breath. It curled just beyond the edge of his senses, drawing him onward, further into the hush, toward the star. It was then he came upon the stone garden. It lay in a clearing ringed with silver-leaf trees, their trunks glowing faintly with dew. All across the ground lay stones, not scattered, but placed with purpose, each one smooth and pale, arranged in spirals and circles, in pathways that led nowhere but felt important all the same. Miro stepped softly into the garden, and his lantern flared once. The light touched the stones, and tiny ripples of warmth radiated from them. Not heat, but something older. Something like remembering. He knelt beside one stone, placing a hand gently upon its surface. It was cool, but not cold. And when he closed his eyes, he heard a whisper, soft as breath against his cheek. We remember the ones who forget. His eyes opened slowly. The lantern had gone still. Miro looked up. Above him, the sky shimmered, and somewhere, beyond the curve of trees and stardust, the little lost star quivered once, just once, as if it, too, remembered something it had almost forgotten. In the hush of the stone-ringed glade, where memory lingered like mist over water, a soft rustling sound rose from the trees. It wasn't wind, not quite, it was the careful turning of pages. Dry, slow, and thoughtful. Miro turned toward the sound, holding the lantern aloft, and there, between the trunks of two silver birches, stepped a creature not entirely of earth. It was neither tall nor short, its shape shifting slightly as if not bound to one form. It wore a cloak of dried leaves and twilight, with stars caught in its hem. Its face was gentle and unreadable, like the surface of still water under moonlight. In its hands, it held a large, open book. The keeper of the garden had arrived. The creature tilted its head to one side, regarding Miro with eyes like dew on midnight grass. "You've come," it said, though its mouth did not move. The voice was within the space between lantern flickers and heartbeat echoes. "The silence drew you, as it always does." Miro nodded. "Something has forgotten itself." The keeper closed the book slowly. "Yes. A name has slipped. A thread has come undone. When stars lose their names, the world feels the forgetting. Even the stones notice." Miro looked around the garden again, his gaze drifting across the pale, smooth stones. "Are these memories?" "Echoes," said the keeper. "Each stone remembers a name once held and lost. Not just stars. Dreams, too. Songs. Even old friendships that were never said aloud. This is where they rest, waiting for those who will listen." The lantern in Miro's hand pulsed gently. The keeper knelt beside a central stone, larger than the rest. Upon its surface was a faint engraving, swirls, curves, and a single dot of shimmer in the center. "This is where the star's name was last known," the keeper whispered. "It passed through here, shedding its name like a cloak too heavy to carry. Not in sorrow, but in longing." "Longing?" Miro asked softly. The keeper nodded. Some names grow heavy over time. They begin to define too much. And the star, small and kind, wished only to sing freely again. But without a name, the song lost its root. Miro sat beside the stone, the weight of the moment like warm wool around his shoulders. Can it remember? Perhaps, the keeper said. But it must be called, not with words, but with wonder. And only a traveler who listens with their lantern heart can find the notes to do so. Miro's hand tightened gently around the lantern's handle. The flame within stirred like breath in sleep. Where do I go? He asked. The keeper pointed upward, not toward the sky, but toward a path that wound between the trees, threaded with starlight. Follow the places where forgotten things gather. The wind will guide you next. She remembers the name's first note. As Miro stood, the stones shimmered faintly around him, as if nodding in approval. The keeper returned to its book, its presence already fading into the hush of the garden. And once again, Miro walked on, into the night, into the memory of a song not yet lost. The path beyond the stone garden was barely a path at all. It twisted gently between tree roots and flowered moss, beneath arches of ivy that glowed faintly with dream dust. As Miro walked, the lantern's glow flickered with quiet curiosity, casting soft reflections that danced like memory across bark and fern. The trees here whispered to one another in a language older than sound. Their voices rustled through leaves and fluttered across the ground, stirring small spirals of mist with every sigh. And in that rustle, Miro heard something more, a hum, thin and high, like a thread of music trailing just ahead. He followed it until the trees began to thin, and the path opened to a wide glade where the wind was waiting. She was not how stories described her, not wild or roaring, not invisible and free. No, the wind here took form. She stepped across the grasses like a dancer made of silk and sky, her hair woven from cirrus and soft breath. Her cloak trailed behind her like the scent of rain before a storm, and when she turned to face Miro, her eyes sparkled with the echo of 1,000 old names. "You carry the lantern of listening," she said, her voice curling like ribbons around him. "And you seek a name the stars have lost." Miro nodded, watching her with wide, wondering eyes. "The name you seek," the wind whispered, "was born on a breath like mine. It was spoken once in a dream, then sung by the star each night. But in its longing to be unburdened, the star let the name drift, and I caught it." Her hands moved slowly, weaving the air itself into strands of invisible sound. But names are delicate, child of stillness. They unravel when held too tightly, or left too long unspoken. "Can it be gathered again?" Miro asked softly. The wind smiled, though there was sorrow in it. "Not all at once. You must collect the parts. The sound of its syllables, the color of its glow, the shape of its silence. Each piece lies in a different place, watched over by those who remember not with minds, but with hearts." She turned and pointed to the western edge of the glade, where mist swirled above a small stream that shimmered in moonlight. "Follow the river of reflection. It remembers the light the star once gave. When you find it, listen not to its flow, but to what lies beneath it. Miro bowed gently, and the wind stepped back, her form growing lighter, more translucent, until she drifted up into the canopy like a breath returning to the sky. The lantern in his hand pulsed twice, once with thanks, once with promise. And with the hush of the glade folding around him like a dream-woven shawl, Miro continued onward, toward the river that remembered light. The stream sang a song of glass and time. Its waters moved slowly, not in haste, but with purpose, curling around rocks smooth as thought, slipping beneath low branches heavy with dew. Miro walked beside it, each step softened by moss and drifting leaves, the lantern's glow mirrored in the rippling current. Here, the night grew quieter still. Even the crickets hushed their tunes, and the wind, now far behind, had left only her memory in the fluttering of grass. The stream, however, seemed to speak in sighs and glimmers. Miro knelt by its edge, peering into the water's mirror. At first, he saw only his own reflection, soft-eyed, quiet, the lantern glowing beside him like a companion rather than a tool. But as he leaned closer, the surface shimmered, and shifted. The star appeared. Not high above, but within the water. Small, pale, and flickering faintly with the memory of its song. It hovered there, trembling like a candle in a deep well, and around it flowed ribbons of light, dim and broken. Then came the whisper, not from the river itself, but from beneath it. The star once glowed with the color of first dreams. Miro tilted his head, heart thudding slowly. "First dreams," he whispered. The voice beneath the water was like a lullaby hummed into the folds of a blanket. The ones not yet shaped by worry. Dreams of floating. Of laughing with no sound. Of drifting through sky-colored seas with no beginning and no end. Miro watched as a ripple passed over the image of the star, and for a moment, its light deepened. A soft hue bloomed within it, neither blue nor gold, but a shade that could only be called hopeful hush. "That is the color," the river said. "The first piece of its name." And as the words were spoken, the hue rose from the water like a single thread of silk. It drifted toward Miro's lantern and slipped into the flame, which pulsed and glowed with a gentler, warmer light. He exhaled, not in relief, but in wonder. One piece found. "Where shall I go next?" he asked, though the river did not answer. Instead, it offered a vision. Upon its surface appeared a meadow of silver grass, where shadows danced without fear and echoes drifted lazily across open air. In the center of the meadow stood a figure, tall, slow-moving, wrapped in robes of woven dusk. Miro blinked. The vision faded. But the lantern pulsed again. The path had changed. With a final glance at the river that whispered memories of first dreams, Miro stood and turned eastward, heart steady, flame aglow, and the hush of forgotten starlight guiding his way. The path eastward was narrow and quiet, lined with feathergrass and small, glowing flowers that opened only for moonlight. As Miro walked, the lantern swung gently at his side, its light now tinged with the hue of first dreams, a shade that had no name, but carried with it a sense of weightless laughter and skies that never ended. The forest gradually thinned, trees giving way to low hills brushed with fog, until at last the land unfolded into a broad, shimmering meadow. The meadow of echoes. Here, silence wore a different shape. It was not the absence of sound, but the presence of memory, folded into the grass like threads in a tapestry. Each blade shimmered with voices from long ago, laughter that had once rung clear, footsteps that never quite faded, lullabies whispered to no one in particular. The very air felt like a sigh paused mid-breath. Moreau stepped into the meadow, and the lantern dimmed, not in fear, but in reverence. He took a moment, barefoot in the silver grass, letting the echoes rise around him. They came not from outside, but from within. Tiny moments he had forgotten, his grandmother's hum as she tied his shoes, the hush of a lullaby sung when the world felt too large. In the center of the meadow stood the figure he had seen in the river's vision. Tall and still, the being wore robes stitched from dusk, woven with strands of shadow and starlight. Where its face should have been, there was only soft darkness, like the curve of night between constellations. It stood beside a stone arch, half-formed, half-forgotten, rising from the earth like a memory too precious to fade. "You seek the shape of the star's silence," the figure said, its voice like a bell rung beneath water. "But to find it, you must listen with the part of you that speaks no words." Moreau stepped closer, and the lantern flickered gently. "What is the shape of silence?" he asked. The figure reached out, touching the arch with one slender hand. A low, humming tone pulsed outward, rippling through the grass. "It is the place where sound would go if it dared. The hollow beneath a song. The pause between the heartbeats of the sky." Moreau closed his eyes. And there, in the hush that followed, he felt it. The shape of the star's silence was not empty, it was full of longing. A longing to be heard. To be known without being named. It was gentle and wide, like arms open for an embrace that had not yet come. A soft breath escaped his lips. The lantern responded, glowing brighter for a moment, then settling into a new rhythm, slower, deeper, like the hush before sleep. The figure stepped back, nodding once. "You carry now the second piece," it whispered. "The stillness that belongs to the star. Keep it well, for the last part lies beyond the reach of voice or sight. Only those who dream while waking may find it." Moreau bowed, not out of habit, but gratitude. The figure vanished like mist when the sun arrives, not in haste, but in certainty. And as he turned to leave the meadow, the grass seemed to part before him, whispering soft echoes of thanks. Beyond the meadow rose a hill. Not tall, but wide, with sides wrapped in ferns and old ivy, like a resting creature curled beneath the sky. Moreau climbed it slowly, the lantern swinging like a pendulum, its glow now rich with both color and stillness, two pieces of a song waiting for their final note. At the hill's crest, the world opened. Before him stretched a lake, round and silver, so calm it looked more like sky than water. Stars reflected perfectly upon its surface, unmoving and vast, as if the heavens had poured themselves downward to rest. Moreau stepped closer, and the lantern dimmed again, allowing the reflection to glow. This was the sky's mirror. Few ever found it. Fewer still understood it. It was not just a place, it was a question, quietly waiting. Miro knelt at the edge and looked into the mirrored night. He saw the constellations above, and one small star missing from its place. In the water's reflection, the gap pulsed gently, like a breath waiting to be drawn. "Where are you?" he whispered, voice barely rising above the stillness. The lantern stirred, and the lake responded, not with ripples, but with light. A line of reflection stretched from the empty spot in the sky down to the water, then into the surface where Miro watched. Slowly, that line curved, until it formed a symbol. Not a letter, not a word, but a gesture of meaning, soft and whole. It was the final piece, the form of the star's song. Not what it sounded like, but what it felt like when sung. And it felt like coming home. Miro reached out, palm open over the water. The symbol rose, made of light and memory, and floated toward his lantern. As it touched the flame, a soft chime echoed from within, not loud, not sharp, just a perfect, round note of completion. The lantern now held three things. The color of first dreams. The silence of longing. The shape of coming home. Three pieces. Three truths. And above, in the space between stars, the little lost one flickered once more, not bright, but with recognition. It had felt the call. And it was listening. The lake lay behind him, still and silver, its reflections folded once more into the quiet of the earth. Miro stepped away from its edge, and the lantern in his hand pulsed faintly, as if breathing. The three pieces it held shimmered in harmony now, the color of first dreams, the silence of longing, and the shape of coming home. Each flickered within the flame like petals gently turning in sleep. But the journey was not yet complete. Ahead, the land narrowed into a ridge, with mist curling around the edges like the edges of a forgotten page. The ridge became a long, slender bridge, formed not of wood or stone, but of something older. It stretched between two great cliffs, suspended by nothing visible, arcing through the air as if written across the sky in thought rather than substance. It was called the Bridge Between Breaths. Miro stepped onto it, and immediately, the world around him changed. Not in shape, but in feeling. Time slowed. Sounds faded. Even his footsteps made no sound, though he could feel them clearly, each one softer than the last. The bridge did not lead to a place. It led inward. Beneath his feet, the mist shimmered like distant dreams. Within it flickered small visions, memories not entirely his, but close enough to feel familiar. A hand letting go of another. A child reaching for stars drawn on a ceiling. A deep breath taken before a farewell never spoken. Each memory hovered like a note, soft and unfinished, then dissolved into light. And then, he saw it. Hovering just beyond the bridge's far edge, not on land but suspended in air, was the little star. It had drifted far from the sky's familiar tapestry, now glowing faintly, as if unsure whether to return or disappear. It did not fall. It did not rise. It merely waited. Miro approached slowly, the lantern steady in his hand. The star did not shy away. Its light fluttered, then calmed. It remembered something, almost. "You came far," a voice said, not aloud, but within Miro's thoughts. The star was not speaking, yet it was. Miro said nothing. He only held up the lantern. The star pulsed softly, like a question. And Miro opened the lantern's flame. Out drifted the color, like a breeze from a forgotten childhood. The silence, like an embrace left open. The shape, like a door in the heart waiting to be walked through. The star quivered. Then, slowly, sang. Not with words. Not with notes. But with light. A soft, steady melody poured from it, rising gently, curling around the sky. It was not a song to be heard, but to be felt. It passed through the bridge, through Miro, through the cliffs and hills and trees beyond. And far in the distance, across the skies, the stars stirred, blinking in recognition. The little star had found its name again, not the name it once had, but the one it had grown into. And it fit. As the song unfolded like moonlight across ripples, the sky above Miro changed. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with grace. The stars leaned closer, forming patterns they had not worn in ages. The constellations paused in their quiet wanderings to listen. Even the wind returned, gentler now, her cloak trailing behind her like dusk turned to silk. She did not speak, only bowed her head in stillness as the lullaby passed over her. The little star hovered before Miro, shining now in full, but not with blazing brightness. It glowed like a heartbeat remembered, a promise kept, a dream revisited after many years. It had no need to return to where it once belonged in the sky. For now, the sky would reshape around it. Miro felt a warmth rise in his chest, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he had ever truly known what he was seeking. But this felt whole. As if something he hadn't known was missing had quietly returned to its place. The lantern in his hand dimmed now, not from loss, but completion. Its flame no longer needed to hold the pieces of the star. They had been restored. The light curled inward, resting, satisfied. And then, slowly, the bridge beneath Miro began to fade. Not in danger, not with haste, but as all dream bridges do when their journey is done. The wind stepped closer. "It is time," she said, her voice a hush on his shoulder. Miro looked once more at the star, which circled above him, slow and grateful. It sang again, this time, a softer note, like a farewell wrapped in warmth. Then it rose. Back toward the sky. Not to its old place, but to a new one, between two constellations that shifted aside as if making room for a friend returning home. And there, it settled. Whole again. Above the earth, the hills, the willow, and the listening lantern light. Miro stood on the last breath of the bridge, feeling the hush within him mirror the sky. And the night bloomed open. Miro stepped off the bridge just as it vanished behind him, folding into the mist like a breath returned to the earth. He found himself at the edge of the meadow once more, though now it looked different, not in shape, but in feeling. The grass shone brighter, the trees stood taller, and the echoes that danced across the field no longer carried sorrow, but peace. The lantern in his hand had dimmed to a soft pulse, warm and steady. It no longer flickered with searching light. Instead, it glowed as something at rest, content, quiet, remembering. Moreau held it for a while, watching the rhythm of the flame like one might watch the rise and fall of someone sleeping. He sat beneath the same crooked willow from which he'd first watched the star drift into the sky's edge. The tree's long branches swayed in a breeze full of lullabies, and the hill beneath him hummed softly with a calm that went deeper than words. Above him, the star shone, no longer lost, no longer nameless. It was not the brightest in the sky, nor the most distant. But it had a new place now, cradled gently between constellations that bowed in welcome. And when it sang, the melody was quieter than before, but richer. Whole. The sky had remembered it. And more than that, the star had remembered itself. Moreau let his eyes drift closed for a moment. The wind curled beside him like a shawl. The willow creaked once, slowly, like a friend sighing in her sleep. Everything was still. Everything was home. Somewhere between waking and sleep, in the gentle space that only opens when the heart is quiet and the stars are listening, Moreau felt the world shift softly. Not with change, but with acceptance. The kind that comes when all pieces have found their place. He stayed on the hill until the first blush of dawn colored the edge of the sky, not gold, not pink, but a pale shade that could only be named in dreams. And still, the star remained above, watching, glowing, whispering its lullaby to the waking world. Moreau stood at last and looked at the lantern one final time. The flame inside now held no color, no shape, no silence. It held only stillness. It no longer needed to lead or light or listen. Its purpose, for now, was complete. He placed it gently in the hollow of the willow tree's roots. The earth shifted slightly to accept it, cradling it like something sacred. A gift returned. And then, barefoot and smiling, Moreau descended the hill. He did not look back, not because he had forgotten, but because he had remembered. The star's name was safe now, and in some quiet, shining way, so was his own. The villagers would wonder, perhaps, why the lantern no longer swung from the tree each night. They might ask where Moreau had wandered to in the hours when moonlight painted the rooftops. But the wind would know. And the willow would hum. And the stars would blink in time with a soft, remembered song. For in every dream afterward, whenever one looked up into the sky and found a small, steady star singing without words, they would feel something gentle stir within them. A warmth. A pause. A peace. And though they would not know why, they would smile. Because in the deepest part of the night, where stories become stars, and names become songs, a little star that once lost itself had found its way again. And that is where dreamers go. To listen. To remember. To rest. And finally, we come to a village by a still lake. Where a bell has not rung for 100 years, and a quiet girl who speaks to stones begins to awaken the silence. In a quiet village wrapped in lavender fields and the soft sighs of wind chimes, there lived a boy named Elian. He was not remarkable by the ways of stories, he had no sword, no quest, no prophecy tucked behind his ears. But Elian had something else, dreams that glowed like fireflies and lingered long after morning light. He often woke with the memory of lanterns that floated without strings, of stalls made from lace and mist, of merchants who wore cloaks sewn from stardust and sold things like unopened laughter or jars of sea wind. The dream never came when he wished. It came only when he forgot to want it. The first time he saw the market, he had been just 7, a fevered sleep, a hush outside the window, then the sound of bells ringing backward. He remembered stepping through a veil of rain that didn't fall, into a place that felt like it had always existed. There was music, not played but felt, and the air was sweet with the scent of memories too soft to name. Elian had woken before he could buy anything. But ever since, he waited for the dream to return. He didn't speak of it. Dreams, after all, are like dandelion seeds, speak too loudly, and they drift away. Elian grew. So did his dreams. By day, he worked in the bookbinder's shop, stitching spines and listening to the creak of old pages. But at night, when sleep curled around him like a warm shawl, he watched the edge of his vision for the flicker of a lantern. Sometimes, he saw only ordinary dreams, echoes of real places or odd half-memories. But once, on the cusp between seasons, he dreamed again of the market. This time, it began with a leaf. It was red as a candle's heart and shaped like a flame, fluttering gently through the sky. Elian caught it without thinking. On its surface, in curling golden script, was his name. Just his name. And the moment he touched it, the world shifted. The lavender fields vanished. The moon blinked, and he stood once again on the stone path that led to the market that appeared only in dreams. It looked just as he remembered, though perhaps it always looked a little different, bending itself to the shape of the dreamer. Lanterns floated like slow-moving stars above delicate stalls of silk. There were fountains of melted music, mirrors that showed not reflections but remembered kindnesses, and vendors who hummed in languages that sounded like wind in treetops. And there, near the center of it all, was a stall that hadn't been there before. A stall made entirely of folded paper, creased with care, standing tall without a single nail or string. On its sign, in ink that shimmered like water, it read, "For things that were almost said." Elian stepped closer. The paper stall rustled in the breeze, though there was no wind. Its folds shifted gently, as if it were breathing, or listening. A single lantern hovered above, casting a golden light that didn't shine outward, but inward, making thoughts feel nearer than skin. Behind the stall stood a merchant with quiet eyes and a voice like moth wings. They wore a robe the color of forgotten ink and moved with the stillness of someone who had waited a long, long time. "Welcome," they said, with a nod so small it might have been imagined. "To the place where silence lives." Elian looked down. Spread across the counter were dozens of paper slips, some curled, others flat, each one blank except for a single shimmering word. Almost. If. Not quite. Wait. What are these? Elian asked softly. Words that never found breath, said the merchant. Some were swallowed. Some were lost in fear. Others waited too long and became dust. Elian reached for a slip that read, "I wish." The paper fluttered beneath his fingers, warm like breath. And he felt it, an echo from years ago, sitting beside someone he once loved, the words in his chest like sunlight behind a curtain. He had never said it. He had only wanted to. He stepped back, heart slow and strange. Can they be spoken now? The merchant smiled gently. Not with the tongue, but perhaps with the dream. Elian wandered. The market curved around him like a ribbon in water, always shifting, never hurried. Some stalls sold time, moments caught in little glass bells. Others traded in silence, different silences, too. The silence before a storm. The silence after laughter. The silence between two people who know the same sorrow. But the next stall that called to him was one without a sign. It was shaped from hollow reeds and sea grass, and hanging from its corners were tiny chimes made from pearl and bone. Behind it sat a short woman with long silver braids and eyes full of distance. She didn't speak. She only lifted her hand and gestured toward the table. There, laid out in velvet-lined trays, were small things, a cork sealed with wax, a bell with no clapper, a seashell plugged with cotton, a folded handkerchief with nothing inside. Elian tilted his head. What is this stall? The woman smiled, soft as a lullaby. Then she pointed to a small tag that had been tucked beneath the velvet. It read, "Sounds no longer heard." Elian touched the bell. A hum stirred in his ribs, an echo of a sound he hadn't realized he missed. The creak of a door in his grandmother's cottage. The gentle tap of rain on a forgotten windowsill. The voice of someone long gone, laughing once, far away. He pressed a finger to the cork and felt the memory of a song, half-hummed, never finished, lost to time but still alive in the quiet parts of him. When he looked up, the woman had already turned away. She was humming. Elian left the stall with a silence folded carefully into his chest. Deeper into the market, where the lanterns grew dimmer and the ground felt less like stone and more like memory, Elian came upon a stall that resembled an old greenhouse, its frame made of bronze ivy, its walls of smoky glass. Inside ticked hundreds of clocks. But none had hands. The ticking was soft, not mechanical, but organic. Like the sound of thought. Of waiting. Of breath held between moments. The stall keeper wore spectacles with no lenses and greeted Elian with a nod. "You're late," he said. "But not too late." "I didn't know I was coming," Elian replied, blinking. "No one does," said the keeper, gesturing him inside. Elian stepped carefully between the clocks. Some pulsed like heartbeats. Others ticked slowly, as if in dream time. A few didn't tick at all, they simply shimmered, quietly. "These," the keeper whispered, "are clocks that measure not hours, but readiness. Each one starts only when its owner is ready for what comes next." Elian paused before a small, round clock made of pale wood. Its face was blank, but as he stood before it, a single hand appeared. Then another. Then a third, one that curved backward. It ticked once. Gently. And Elian felt something stir inside, a readiness he had not known was growing. Just beyond the ticking clocks, Elian found a narrow path that seemed made of woven parchment. As he stepped along it, the sounds of the market faded, replaced by the gentle scratching of pens, though no one was writing. At the end of the path stood a tall, spindly stall with shelves upon shelves of tiny vials, each no bigger than a raindrop bottle. Some were silver, others smoky, a few completely invisible unless caught in a certain slant of lantern light. A sign carved into driftwood read, "Ink for dreams that cannot be written." Elian looked closely. Each vial had a label, only a single word. Almost. After. Before. Elsewhere. He picked up one filled with ink the color of dusk and held it in his palm. It shimmered, then vanished. Not spilled. Not absorbed. Just, gone. He turned to the keeper, an owl-like person hunched in shadows, who blinked slowly and said, "Some stories do not want to be told. They only want to be kept." Elian placed the empty vial back on the shelf. The memory it had held, of a moment he had once imagined but never lived, remained in his chest. Faint. Soft. But whole, at last. He breathed in, and the air smelled like old letters and twilight. The market was beginning to feel like home. Elian wandered toward a quieter corner of the market, where the lanterns glowed lower and the air felt thick with thought. There, nestled between two towering shelves of nothing but folded scarves, stood a small mirror stall. It was unguarded. The mirror itself stood taller than him, framed in wood that looked grown rather than carved. Instead of showing his reflection, it shimmered with a soft mist, like breath upon glass. Above it, a wooden sign read, "Not what you see. What you remember." Cautiously, Elian stepped in front of it. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, the mist cleared, not into his face, but into moments. A pair of hands tying a string around a birthday parcel. A cup of tea left warm on a windowsill. A voice, laughing, not quite heard, but felt, echoing in his ribs. These weren't grand memories. Not the kind that stories are made from. But they were his. Small, tender fragments that made him feel fuller than any triumph ever could. The mirror pulsed once with light. And Elian understood, it wasn't showing him the past. It was showing him what had mattered most. Part 8, The Stall That Asked a Question. It was near the end of the market, or perhaps its beginning. In dreams, directions do not behave. But Elian came upon a narrow space, tucked like a bookmark between two broader aisles. This stall was nothing but a chair. A single, wooden chair beneath a canopy of velvet stars. No vendor. No signs. Only a quiet hush, as if the market itself held its breath. Elian sat. The moment he did, the stars above began to shimmer, and a question unfolded in the air before him, not spoken, not written, but known. What have you never dared to ask? He didn't answer. Not aloud. But inside, somewhere near the place where the clocks had ticked and the ink had vanished, the question stirred something old and silent. He remembered sitting at his father's feet, listening to the scrape of tools and the ticking of a wall clock, wanting to ask, "Do you miss her?" But never did. He remembered a friend who had once said goodbye without meaning it. And the way he'd swallowed the question, "Will you come back?" He remembered so many almost questions. Left unopened, like envelopes without address. A single tear drifted down his cheek, but it felt warm, not sad. And the stars above the chair glowed a little brighter, as if to say, "Asking matters, even if only here." Elian stood. The market around him hummed, not loudly, but like a lullaby reaching its last verse. Something was calling him forward. Something gentle. Something final. As Elian wandered through the final stretch of the market, the air changed. It grew warmer, not hot, but gentle, like the warmth that lingers after someone has left the room. The stalls were fewer now, spaced farther apart, as though the market itself was slowing, preparing for stillness. And then, he saw it, a lantern stall, glowing with hundreds of lights suspended in midair, each one a different shape, some round as moons, some long as sighs, some flickering gently like thoughts just about to be spoken. The keeper wore robes stitched with falling leaves and said nothing as Elian approached. Instead, they lifted one lantern down from the air and offered it to him. Elian took it with careful hands. It was small and made of etched glass, warm and glowing, not from within, but as if it remembered being held. On its base was carved a single word. His name. No more, no less. He turned to ask what it meant, but the keeper only smiled and pointed to a small note tied with silver thread. This lantern is lit each time someone remembers who they are, when no one is watching. Elian held it to his chest. And it pulsed, not with pride, not with sorrow, but with quiet knowing. The kind that glows only in dreams. By now, the market had begun to dim. The stalls faded gently, not vanishing, but becoming less distinct, like details in a story one forgets after waking. The sky above was no longer starless, but full of soft clouds drifting inward, curling like sleepy cats. Elian walked on. And at last, he came to a gate. It was not a grand thing, just a wooden arch woven with sleeping vines and a sign overhead that read, "Exit, if you still need one." He paused. Looked back. The market was not gone. It never truly would be. It would wait, curled into the folds of dreams, unfolding only when someone was ready to feel the things they'd left behind. In his hand, the lantern still glowed, steady and quiet. Elian stepped through the arch. The moment he did, there was no sound, no flash, just a soft feeling, like a blanket being tucked around the edges of his heart. And then he was waking. To lavender fields. To a morning mist. To the scent of books and the hum of light through shutters. But something had stayed. Something small. Something warm. Elian rose with the sun, though it was still hidden behind the hills. The sky wore the soft gray of waking, and the lavender fields shimmered with dew. Everything felt the same. And yet, not. He moved through his morning with a stillness inside him, not empty, but spacious, like a room with the window open. The market had left no footprints. No tokens. Not even a whisper. Except the lantern. It stood on his bedside table, unlit. But Elian knew, it didn't glow in daylight. It glowed when he remembered himself, those quiet, wordless parts of him that didn't need explaining. When he spoke gently to an old book. When he placed a hand over his chest for no reason at all. When he listened, really listened, to silence. That day, and many after, Elian went about his work. He stitched spines. He folded pages. He smiled at clouds. And sometimes, when no one was looking, he closed his eyes, and felt the market, waiting just beyond the shape of sleep. Years passed, as they do. The world turned softly, like a music box winding down. Elian aged gently, the way paper yellows in sunlight, slowly, tenderly, with grace. He never told many people about the market. He tried once, but the words came out hollow, like shells without their sea. Dreams resist being made into facts. That is their magic. But every so often, someone would speak to him in a certain way, like a pause held just long enough, and he would know, they had been there too. To the place of folded paper and clocks without hands. To the path of ink that vanished and mirrors that remembered. To the market that appeared only in dreams. And sometimes, just before sleep, Elian would feel a flutter at the edge of thought, like a leaf drifting through twilight. On it, perhaps, his name. Or perhaps a question. Or perhaps nothing at all. But it was always enough to make him smile. And somewhere, in a place with no map and no time, the market lit one more lantern. Softly. Quietly. Forever.